Good morning, everybody. My name is I'm an environmental scientist for California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I work at the Los Alamitos office, so basically the area I cover is the Port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, LA County, and Orange County along the coast. And I've been responding to oil spills now for 10 years. And today I'm going to talk about shoreline cleanup. So what do we do when the boom fails and the oil comes to shore? John did a great job on his presentation, but sometimes the boom fails, and this is where we come in with shoreline cleanup. So we'll talk about the goals of response and cleanup as an introduction. Our number one goal is to keep public and workers safe. Can't stress that one enough. And then we want to remove as much oil as possible to minimize environmental impacts. So we can improve conditions for recovery at the site. Those two go hand in hand. Carry out cleanup operations in a manner that does minimal additional injury to the habitat and animals that we're trying to protect. As you'll find out with some of these cleanup techniques, it causes a lot of additional harm to the environment, so we'll discuss that. So our basic response options, this is what we have. The do nothing option, which is basically going to allow natural recovery. A lot of people have a problem with this. They want to see something done when there's an oil spill, but this is actually one of our best options in some areas. Do nothing, just let the oil sit there and go away on its own. Another option we have is we can burn, which they did a lot in the Gulf. I don't think we'll be doing much of that here in this state. You can chemically treat it, which we'll be talking about tomorrow. So basically with these two, with burning and chemically treating, it's very limited opportunity to do these, and plus there's all kinds of other constraints that go along with it. So may not happen, especially in smaller spills. We can recover on the water, which John just talked about, and we can recover on shore. So these are our two big ones here, recovery on water and recovery on shore. And as they said, 10 to 15% recovery from water, so the rest of it we're going to get on shore. So the response process, in summary, is we want to stop the source of the oil and contain the spread of it. And we do that by putting boom out. We want to assess the character of the oil and the trajectory where it's going. Determine our resources at risk, which was talked about extensively earlier. And establish our response priorities. Assess oil habitats through the process of SCAT, which you'll be trained on later today, I believe. Then we want to select our response methods and conduct our operations. So basically our response methods are going to be certain shoreline cleanup methods that we'll go over shortly. And then we want to evaluate how effective our response option that we chose was. And once we achieve a point where we're satisfied that the oil is clean, we'll go ahead and sign it off. So cleanup strategy selection depends on the oil type and its quantity. Is it on the water or on the shore? The shoreline type it's impacting. Logistical constraints. Presence of sensitive species and or habitat. Archaeological, cultural, historical considerations. And the recommendation by planning and operations. And of course the always important personnel safety. So you have to know the classification of your oil product to determine the right cleanup option. So with your crude oil, it gets broken down into certain products, and on the top of this list is lighter so propane, which is a gas, aviation gasoline, and gasoline. So these are all lighter products. And then going further down, you would get things in the diesel fuel category, kerosene, jet fuel, diesel fuel. And these are considered non-persistent oils. Now we're talking about persistent oils. So these are our heavier fractions. Industrial fuel oils, motor and gear oil, bunker C, which intermediate fuel oil 180 and 380. This is basically the oil that fuels large ships. It's thick and gooey, black oil, very difficult to clean when it does get to the shoreline. And then even heavier than that is grease, asphalt, and tar. So those are our persistent oils. Okay, so when we do know we have oil on the shoreline, there are some resources we can use to help us decide what cleanup option to choose. And one really, really important resource that I recommend looking at is this NOAA guide. It's called Characteristic Coastal Habitats, Choosing Spill Response Alternatives. And this is basically a list of matrices that list a certain shoreline habitat and a certain product that's spilled, and it will suggest a cleanup option. These are just suggestions. You can there's other things you can use. You don't have to go strictly by this book. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this around. And there's a bunch of other really good NOAA books that help out in this too. They're all on that table over there, so if you have a chance, go ahead and take a look at them. So basically the matrix covers each of the 5 oil groups I just spoke about, and then in addition 10 habitat types and 22 plus strategies we can employ. It identifies whether or not a particular strategy is appropriate to remove a specific type of oil in a particular habitat. And remember, these are a planning guide. Okay, so the example that we're going to use right now is for diesel fuel. Basically, it states that whenever you have on the bottom there, it gives what the impact might be by a particular response that we choose. So A is least impact, and then D is most impact. So for a diesel fuel spill, along a shoreline, which is the subtypes here listed are bedrock, gravel, and vegetated. The do nothing option is the least impact that we're going to have. And then the most impact that we're going to have is the mechanical removal option. So this would be employing our vacuum lines and our skimmers. So it may not be the best option to use what John just spoke of, although very effective for certain things. We could create a lot more damage to these shorelines if we were to use those options. But the preferred option would be, if we needed to use something, to probably use sorbent materials. So sorbents are going to have the least amount of impact. Just throwing sorbents onto the diesel really doesn't do too much other than it tends to fill up the landfill with a bunch of saturated, diesel saturated absorbent materials. Okay, so let's talk about some of our response options now. So this option right here, we have a very sensitive intertidal mud flat. Basically, what we would choose here is to do nothing at all. So what's going to happen is the oil is going to settle on this very wet environment as the tide goes out. So we're not just going to go run in there and try to collect that oil. We'll go ahead and just wait for the tide to come back up and probably send some guys out in skiffs and use absorbent materials, or if they can get a skimmer in if time allows with the tides. It's just too sensitive to go ahead and get people out there. So in this environment here, this is a open coast, high energy environment. We would not recommend a cleanup option for these particular environments. And the reason being is it's just too unsafe. We don't want to put people in harm's way in these particular environments. Very hard to access a lot of these, and then when you get down, it's very slippery, very treacherous. You have high energy, large waves that come in. So we want to keep our workers safe. And then what happens in an environment like this, when oil does get in this environment, it's just going to get beat up and go away on its own. There's just a lot going on here, a lot of energy, and it helps make the oil go away on its own. Okay, as John talked about earlier, absorbent materials, sorbent materials. So you have your absorbents, your booms, and your pads. So those are like sponges that soaks the oil in. And then, of course, you have your adsorbents, your pom-poms. And that's basically the oil sticking to the outside, and it works based on it has such a large surface area, and then the oil tends to adhere to the tendrils of the pom-pom, if you want to call it that. Okay, so this is manual removal of oil on shorelines, and this may be what you see on the news a lot whenever there's an oil spill. You see people dressed up in safety gear out on a beach with shovels, bags, rakes. So some additional things that they can use is they've created this nifty little roller thing that would go, it has a adsorbent material on it, and they'll roll over a shoreline that has oil on it, and they'll just walk it down until they need to clean it off and get a new one out there. In these wetland areas, you may have guys out there with shovels and hose and rakes trying to clean up the oily mess. Now, this is a precise way to clean up oil. However, the problem with it is it's very costly and very time consuming. It's a lot of people on the beach, a lot of man hours, a lot of safety equipment that they need. So we can talk about this method, which is a little bit more effective at removing oil and a little bit more inexpensive. But with this method here, using heavy equipment, removing oil off the shoreline, the problem with that is you get a lot of collateral damage. So when you bring in equipment such as graders, front-end loaders, excavators, and bulldozers, and you start removing oil from the beach, you're also going to take away a lot of clean sand as well. So very effective at taking the oil away, but you can also take a lot of the clean sand away. So there's kind of a trade-off between using people or using heavy equipment. You really have to weigh the two when you're choosing response alternatives. Okay, so trenching. The pictures that you see here are basically a bunch of trenches in a snowy environment. This option would be more appropriate for probably like an inland spill. Say you have a pipeline that is subsurface and it releases to the surrounding soil. One technique you can do to get that oil is dig a trench nearby in a heavily impacted area, and what happens is the trench is going to end up filling up with oil and water, and with that, that's a good opportunity to go ahead and throw a skimmer in or absorbent materials to start collecting that oil. Now, trenching, it's very dangerous. If you've ever been on a response where there has been trenches dug, they have their own set of safety regulations that they need to go by OSHA. So you just have to be careful and make sure that the company that's doing the response is going by the OSHA regulations as well. We don't want anybody to get hurt in a trench. So flooding, this is basically now we're starting to use water at different levels to help mobilize oil. So flooding is basically, we're just going to be using low pressure, a large volume of water, and we're going to move oil into an open area so it can be collected by absorbent material or by a skimmer. Flooding works best on a lighter oil or a fresh oil. And flooding would also work in a variety of habitats as well. Ambient low pressure washing. So now we're actually using a little bit more pressure. And this would work for light fresh oils as well. And it tends to be, you can be a little bit more precise when you use the low pressure versus the flooding. So as you see, the worker down here has a hose, and he's able to direct it where he wants to direct it to drive the oil out. And now with this, it's less impact to animals and habitat, and as we're going to go ahead and turn up the pressure here, which is going to be a little bit more intrusive, but more effective at removing oil. So ambient high pressure washing. Now the pressure's been turned up a little bit. So this is going to work on oil that's a little bit more stubborn to come off, heavier oils. It works on a variety of different surfaces, but as I said, it's going to be a little bit more impact to the habitat and animals because there's a lot of pressure being employed here, and it can tend to even drive oil deeper than into the substrates than actually trying to get it out in the environment where we need to collect it. But still, there's a place for it, and we've used it extensively in oil spills in the LA Long Beach Harbor. It's probably one of our main go-to response options in the harbor. Now we're going to add heat to the equation. So it's high pressure with hot water and then even steam cleaning as well. And what this does is with the heat, you're making the oil even more mobile. So this is when you're working on oil that's very, very stubborn to get off a certain substrate. And then what I put here is we recommend that you use this in sterile environments because of heat and pressure is just going to kill everything and ruin the habitat. But having said all that, there is a time and place for this, and we use it extensively in LA Harbor. As you can see here, this is Long Beach Harbor, and this is LA Harbor right here, and we've employed these techniques as well extensively. It's very effective. Those pilings that these guys are working on right here, they'll be cleaner after years of abuse of being in the harbor. They'll be, if you look at an area that was not impacted by the oil spill, and you'll see these pier pilings, and then you see a pier piling that was impacted by oil and was cleaned by steam cleaning, it's much more cleaner than the piling that was not impacted by the oil spill. It's amazing. Very effective. So vegetation removal, there might be a couple reasons for vegetation removal in a particular spill. One reason is you need to have access for the cleanup workers and equipment, so you may have to remove vegetation to get those resources into the cleanup area. And the other reason for vegetation removal is it gets impacted by oil. So vegetation that's been impacted by oil can be a chronic source of future oiling. So if the vegetation is considered not too sensitive, we may just go ahead and remove that vegetation. And then usually what happens when we remove vegetation, the responsible party is going to go ahead and mitigate for that vegetation loss because it has some value associated with it for animals. Sediment reworking. So what we do here is basically use heavy equipment or personnel with rakes and shovels, and we're just tilling and turning over the soil. So basically, if there's buried oil, through that process, we're bringing it up to the surface, so it could be collected or it could just attenuate on its own. Also, sediment reworking is used for when we do what's called bioremediation, when we're using microbes to basically eat the oil. We add microbes and fertilizer in certain environments, and then we just go ahead and mix up that soil, and over time, it will help that oil go away. Sediment removal and replacement. We saw a lot of this at the deep water spill on some of the larger expanses of beaches. Basically, they had these large plants, and what they did is they took heavy equipment, removed a lot of contaminated and probably uncontaminated sand, and brought these plants where basically it's just washed. And then it comes out the other end of the plant, nice and clean, and then go put it back where they originally took it from.
Corey, what were they washing that with?
I think mostly heat and water. I don't think they were using any chemicals. I wasn't sure on that. Jordan?
We're trying. There was different methods attempted, and I don't know what they ended up with, but certainly one of them was with chemicals.
It's okay.
Yeah, but I think they end up with the hot water.
Mostly heat and water.
Heat water.
Okay. So to summarize the onshore cleanup, when you spill oil and the booms aren't very effective at getting it, it's basically going to end up on shore, and that's our opportunity to go ahead and collect it. The cleanup strategies employed are going to be determined by shoreline type, oil type, and quantity, and other factors. This will generate a large amount of oily and other waste. There's no doubt about it. When you have a large oil spill, there's going to be bags upon bags, container upon container of waste. It does generate a lot of waste, but we're going to get all the oil. It's labor intensive, it takes a lot of time, and increases the cost of cleanup. But the reality is, it's usually a combination of these response options. Every spill is different, and it usually uses a few of these options along with the offshore options of skimmers and booms. And the method's going to depend on its oil type, the condition, the shore type, and other factors. And the cleanup strategy may cause additional environmental injuries, so you really have to choose your options carefully so we minimize that. In spite of the best efforts, little of the total amount spilled may be recovered. And I say maybe, that doesn't always happen. Lots of spills, we get a lot of the oil recovered. But there's been some spills where you really only get that 10 to 15% after all is said and done. Conclusion, we want prevention as the preferred option. We don't want to have another one of those right there. That's the Exxon Valdez. That's a big mess right there. Questions?